Hello everyone, I am Justin Jimenez Kidit and I'll be explaining about my two topics in one of my major subjects, Stylistics and Discourse. So I will be explaining about the first two units of Module 5, Approaches to Discourse Analysis 3. The first unit is Pragmatics and Introduction and the Unit 2 is Speech Act Theory. So I'll start my discussion with the first unit, Pragmatics and Introduction. Before I proceed to the main discussion, let me first discuss to you the objectives of this unit. At the end of the unit, the students must be able to, first, explain clearly what pragmatics is. Second, identify the basic principles of pragmatics in natural conversation. And last, show how utterances can be explained with reference to context in which they are produced. I want to share to you the major branches in linguistics. First is phonetics, which discusses about speech sounds. Next is phonology, which discusses about phonemes. Morphology, which discusses about the production of words. Syntax, which discusses about phrases and sentences. Semantics, which speaks about the literal meaning of phrases and sentences. And my topic, pragmatics, the meaning in context of discourse. Let me define what pragmatics is. Pragmatics is a field in linguistics concerned with what a speaker implies and the speaker infers from or based on contributing factors. Pragmatics is concerned with the meaning of the message from the speaker and what information that the listener can acquire from that message. The meaning of the message can change based on the factors that may affect the communication process. Another definition of pragmatics is it is concerned with the use of language in social contexts and the ways people produce and comprehend meanings through language. Pragmatics is also concerned with the relationship with other people, the way how we communicate or comprehend or interpret the deep meaning of the language. And last definition that I include is that pragmatics is the study of how words are used, uttered, and produced in a practical sense. When we utter or produce words, we have goals, intentions, and purposes. There are two intents or two meanings in utterance. The first one is informative intent or the sentence meaning. It intends hopes that the audience is made aware of something, and the another type of intent is communicative intent or the speaker meaning. This intention is about letting the audience realizes the purpose of communication. In linguistics, there is the term called pragmatic competence. And what is this term? It means the ability to use language appropriately. It is how knowledgeable we are in terms of the social status of the speakers involved, the social distance between interlocutors. Interlocutors are the ones who take part in the dialogue or in the conversation. Pragmatic competence also speaks about the knowledge in the culture and infer from the utterance the intended meaning of the speaker. In pragmatics, there is the so-called Grice's theory of implicature. This theory was coined by Paul Herbert Grice, a British scholar. An implicature is something meant, implied, or suggested distinct from what is said. This is something that is inferred from the utterance. When we say infer, it is the verb to derive a conclusion from facts or simply guessing the possible outcome of the utterance. There are two types of implicature. First is the conventional implicature, and second, the conversational implicature. So an implicature can be determined by the sentence meaning or by the conversational context and can be conventional and unconventional. The first type of implicature is conventional implicature. These are implications based on the traditional meanings of the words occurring in an utterance. Conjunctions such as but, yet, therefore, however, and even are used in this implicature. It is non-cancelable, non-calculable, detachable, conventional, carried by what is said, and determinate. Conventional implicature are implications based on the conventional or the traditional meaning of the words. When we say non-cancelable or non-calculable, the implicature is already determined or finalized. The another type of implicature is conversational. These are implications derived from the conversational principles or the cooperative principle in conversation, which will be explained by the reporter next to my topic. Let's now move on to the basic pragmatic principles and concepts. This time, I will be defining terms that are commonly used in pragmatics. First two on the list are adherence and context. Let me first define adherence. Adherence is the unit of speech generally bounded by breaths and pauses. It can also be described as the complete unit of talk. Next term to be defined is context. Context is everything that surrounds the making of the utterance. Something or everything that surrounds the making of utterance. These are the factors that may or may not affect how words are produced. There are 5 types of context. The first type is physical context. Physical context is the setting where the speech occurs. For example, there are 2 students who are talking, and classroom is the physical context. The second type is cultural context. It is the knowledge of the speaker and the addressee of the culture in which they are operating. This has something to do with cultural awareness between the interlocutors. The third type is social context. It is the knowledge of the expectations and discursive practices of the people, especially as it relates to the social roles and relationships. This has something to do with our relationship with other people, how we communicate with other people using language. The fourth type of context is epistemic. Epistemic contexts are the knowledge of the world of the speaker. And last, linguistic context, the utterances that precede and follows one under consideration. Basic concept in pragmatics that needs to be defined is the term entailment. Entailment is also known as the logical implication. Entailments are the deductions and references we have about particular utterances that make us interpret them appropriately. For example, the utterance is that the president was assassinated yesterday, and it may entails that the president is dead. Next term to be defined is implicature. This term was already mentioned on my previous discussion. An implicature is something that is meant, implied, or suggested distinct from what is said. It can be part of the sentence meaning or dependent on conversational context. It has anything that is inferred from the utterance. Example of implicature is that the utterance, "Have you got some cash on you?" It may implicate that the speaker may want to borrow some money from the listener, or the speaker wanted the listener to bought or buy him something to eat, for example. In pragmatics, there is also the term called deixis. It means the use of reference items in an utterance. Words that are considered deictic include I, you, now, here, that, there, and etc. There are 5 kinds of deixis. The first type is discourse deixis. This refers to a portion of a discourse relative to the speaker's current location in the discourse. Take note of the term speaker's current location. This will be your clue of what this kind of deixis means. For example, I hope you enjoyed that story. The deictic word there is the word that, which implies the current situation or location of the speaker. Another example is that the vocal cord vibrates when some vowels are produced. These are called voice sounds. The deictic word there is the word this, which interpreted as it is where the speaker's located. Personal deixis. These are used to refer to the participant role in the referent or of the referent in a discourse. This includes the first person, second person, and the third person deixis. This also means that in this personal deixis, we use the first person point of view, second person point of view, and the third person point of view. Examples are, Tola can come this evening. She must make sure she sees me before leaving. And the deictic word is the pronoun she. Another example is that, can you see that book with him? The book is mine. The deictic word in this example is the word mine. Place deixis. It is a deictic reference to a location relative to the location of the participant in the speech event. For example, please bring the box here. Obviously, the deictic word in this sentence is the word here, which states the current location of the participant in the conversation. Another example is that, once I was blind, but now I see. This is my story. So this is an example of an deictic word, which also, like the first example, speaks about the current situation and location of the speaker. Another kind of deixis is time deixis. Refers to time relative to a temporal reference point. It typically points to the moment of utterance. It is, in this kind of deixis, it implies the immediacy of the message. Example, in 1969, my uncle graduated from the university as a medical doctor. I was very young then. The word then is an example of a deictic word, which implies the time relative to the temporal reference point. Another example is that, please come to my office tomorrow. Tomorrow is an example of deictic word, and also it points to the moment of the utterance. Another kind of deixis is social deixis. This refers to the social characteristics or distinctions between participants in a discourse. For example, Your Excellency, we welcome you to this historic occasion. So, in here we can see a classification, which means a classification. For example, Your Excellency, a deictic word, which is the characteristic or the distinction of someone. For example, my teacher, Your Highness, our beloved doctor, something like that. Another example is that today we are honoring a man who has helped to shape our destiny. Our professor or our mentor, Prof. Promise Brown. So, our mentor in the sentence is the deictic word, which is also a distinction of a participant in the conversation. Last term to be defined is presupposition. It is a background belief relating to an utterance. It is also, or it must be, mutually known or assumed by the speaker and the addressee. It is based on implicit assumption. For example, the utterance is, nobody in their senses would talk that way. The presupposition of this utterance is that the utterance of someone is bad. Number 2, anyone who disagrees in the speaker's opinion is not in his right senses. I hope that's clear. So, that's the end of my first topic, which is Unit 1, Pragmatics and Introduction. And I hope that the terms there are defined clearly and we will be able to use in the future. So, let's now proceed to the Unit 2 of this module. Unit 2 speaks about speech act theory. Before we proceed to the main discussion of our topic, let me first introduce to you or discuss to you the unit objectives. At the end of the unit, the students must be able to first explain what we mean by speech act. Second, identify formative verbs when you see them in an utterance. And last, differentiate between direct and indirect speech act. So, what is speech act? The theory of speech act therefore states that whenever we utter things, we utter messages or statements, we are attempting to accomplish something with words, meaning we have a purpose, a function to attain. Take a look with this example. The first example is that, did you see him yesterday? The form of this sentence is interrogative, and the function of this sentence is to question or asking something about the listener. Another example is that my son is a medical doctor. The form of this sentence is declarative, and its function is to state something, to state that his son is a medical doctor. And last example is, shut the door, please. It is in imperative form, and the function of that sentence is to command the listener to close the door for the speaker. There are also examples below. The first example is, I pronounce you husband and wife. It is a message from the priest received by the husband or the wife or the groom and the bride. This is to proclaim them as Mr. and Mrs. or the priest already proclaiming that they are married. Another example is, I hereby sentence you to 10 years in jail. This sentence came from a judge in a court. This is to inform that the person who was he talking to will be in jail for 10 years. And last example is, I promise to pay you by month end. And this message came from the debtor to someone who he owes a money or something that he borrowed from him. It is a promise. When we say promise, it can be or cannot be attained at the end or on the preceding days. In a speech act, there is the term called performative verbs. The root word of this formative is to perform. Therefore, here is the definition of this term. Performative verbs are verbs used to indicate that certain acts are meant to be performed by the adherents. Like what I have said earlier, perform meaning you'll do a certain act. You have to perform a certain act in order to achieve something. Example is to appoint, to thank, to warn, congratulate, announce, guarantee, request, and offer. There are three kinds of acts. First, locutionary acts. Second, illocutionary acts. And last, perlocutionary acts. Let's first define locutionary acts. These are considered as acts of speaking, acts involved in the construction of speech. They include using particular words in conformity with the particular rules of a language and with certain senses and references as determined by the rules of a language from which they are drawn. Another kind of act is illocutionary acts. These are acts done in speaking, acts that are apparently purpose of using a performative utterance such as promising, sentencing, guaranteeing, thanking, and so forth. So, in locutionary acts, in these acts, we commonly use the performative verbs which we already discussed a while back. Last kind of act is perlocutionary acts. These are the consequences or the byproduct of speaking. They produce some effect on the thoughts, feelings, and actions of the addressee and the speaker. In speech theory, there is the term felicity conditions. Felicity conditions are the conditions that have to be fulfilled before an utterance can be said to be successful. They are the conditions that have to be met before they can say that the speaker has made a sincere statement. The last two terms are direct and indirect speech act. A direct speech act is one whose proposition is clearly uttered, clearly presented in the utterance and understood by the addressee. It is direct to the point from the title itself or from the word itself. It is a utterance that is direct to the point. No other meaning or no other meaning or no other inferences that can be made. It is a direct speech act. So, on the other hand, indirect speech act is the complete opposite of the direct speech act. It is when we intend something which is quite different from the literal meaning of what we say. I just want to remind you that when we only say the literal meaning of this sentence, you are using semantics. But when you form quite different or when you dig deeper from the original or the literal meaning of the message, therefore, you are creating pragmatics. I hope that's clear. So that's the end of the Unit 2, Speech Act Theory, and I hope that you learned something from my presentation. Again, this is Justin Jimenez Kidit, and thank you for listening, and hope that you will use pragmatics and speech theory for the future use. Thank you so much.